Have you ever wondered how graphic designers manage to create illustrations so precise and complex that they look almost vector-based, like they were made in Illustrator? Perfect curves, smooth gradients, clean negative space. And this was happening in the early 1900s. No undo button, no zoom tool, no layers. So how did they do it? Let's break it down. When you look at early 20th century print posters or newspaper illustrations, something feels strangely accurate. The geometry is perfect. The shading feels controlled. Some gradients even look airbrushed. At first glance, it almost looks like a photograph that's been vectorized. But it wasn't. What you're seeing is a combination of craftsmanship, optical science, chemistry, and industrial mechanics working together in a way that feels surprisingly modern. A common assumption is that artists simply carved microscopic details directly into stone or wood. Not exactly. Different techniques were used depending on the result needed. They've used lithography, drawing with greasy materials on limestone or metal plates, relief printing, or letterpress, using raised metal type and image blocks, and photomechanical processes, using cameras and light-sensitive plates. And here's where things get interesting. They didn't design at final size. They worked bigger. Designers often created illustrations at 2 or 3 times the intended print scale. At that size, curves could be refined more carefully, line weight could be controlled with more confidence, and tonal transitions could be built gradually instead of forced into tiny spaces. Then the artwork was photographically reduced to its final dimensions. That reduction did something powerful. Small inconsistencies disappeared. Line edges tightened visually. Dense textures compressed into smoother tonal fields. Detail didn't vanish, it concentrated. So what looks like microscopic precision wasn't carved at microscopic scale. It was drawn large, then optically refined. To reduce artwork, printers used something called a process camera, sometimes referred to as a reproduction camera. These were massive vertical or horizontal cameras designed specifically to photograph artwork at controlled scales. The artist creates the full composition. The camera photographs it at the desired percentage, and a negative is produced. That negative is then transferred onto a light-sensitive printing plate. This is where chemistry enters the picture. The plate was coated with a photosensitive emulsion. Light passed through the negative. Exposed areas hardened or changed chemically. Unexposed areas were washed away. Now you had a printing plate. And here's the key. Once the plate existed, you didn't need to redo the image for every newspaper copy. The plate became the master. From there, mechanical presses could produce hundreds or thousands of identical prints. But what about the gradients? This is where most people get confused. Because when you zoom into certain illustrations, the shading doesn't look like obvious dots. So how were gradients created? Several methods were used. 1. Fine halftone screens, meaning breaking images into microscopic dot patterns. 2. Manual stippling and hatching for extremely controlled line density. 3. Grease crayon lithographic shading, allowing tonal variation directly on stone. 4. Airbrush techniques in later decades. 5. Photographic tonal transfers. When printed small enough, those dots and textures visually blend. Your eye does the smoothing. What looks like a smooth gradient is often thousands of precisely calculated micro-decisions. When printed small enough, those dots and textures visually blend. Your eye does the smoothing. What looks like a smooth gradient is often thousands of precisely calculated micro-decisions. Most newspaper pages weren't typed and then printed. They were composed using movable type, individual metal blocks, each representing a letter. Typesetters manually assembled entire paragraphs in frames. Once locked in place, the page became a physical object, a solid typographic sculpture. Illustrations were integrated as separate plates. Every page required its own printing plate or type form. But once set up, presses could print rapidly. This wasn't slow, artisanal reproduction. It was industrial precision. So next time you see an early 20th century print that looks suspiciously vector perfect, remember, it wasn't primitive. It was engineered. Not with software, but with optics, pressure, light, and discipline. And maybe the real question isn't, how did they do this without computers? Maybe it's, What have we forgotten by having them?